right, well, thanks, Joseph, for the introduction here. My name is Daryl Johnson. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Orange County Transportation Authority. And I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. And today, I'm going to talk a little bit about our 2 zero-emission pilot projects and the partnerships. And I think the title here is really important. This idea of pilots and partnerships can't be understated when we're approaching new things here. So if we could go to the next slide. I think I just want to spend a quick minute of an overview of OCTA. Many of you might know OCTA, others might not. I won't spend a ton of time here, but we are the County Transportation Planning Agency, and we're focused really on delivering a set of improvements to really make visitors, workers, and residents of Orange County have the opportunity to move around the county in a much better manner as our population grows and our workforce continues to grow over time. We have a multimodal approach to it. We're only one of really 3 large urban transportation authorities in the state that have a complete portfolio of complete streets, transit, highways, and sustainability. And today what I'll talk about a little bit is how we intersect this idea of transit and sustainability. So besides streets, of course, we have a lot of opportunities to improve freeways as well as own and operate toll express lanes. Go to the next slide. So before I jump into the specifics of today's conversation about zero-emission bus transit, I want to take a moment to just talk about our wide variety of environmental programs and how this sort of fits into it. So we have everything from air quality initiatives to climate resiliency planning, as well as the zero-emission bus efforts, which I'll go into a little more detail in a moment. Measure M is our half-cent sales tax in Orange County, originally passed by the voters in 1991, renewed in 2006. In effect from 2011 through 2041, not to be confused with Los Angeles County's Measure M, but similar concept, of course, and built into our sales tax measure passed by the voters in 2006. And I think that's worthwhile to think about as we sit here in 2021 and think about what the voters passed in 2006. Within Orange County, 70% of the voters said yes to this. Is it had 2 unique environmental programs within the sales tax measure. The first one we call our environmental mitigation program. It sets aside and allocates 5% of what we call net freeway revenues. It's a comprehensive effort to offset the environmental impacts of the Measure M freeway program by acquiring and preserving large swaths of open space and protected space. So we've acquired about 1,200 acres of open space, and we have underway with restoration and rehabilitation of a number of other acres in that space. And that was sort of what was on the voters' mind, which I think is pretty unique in 2005, 2006. The other portion of that is 2% of our total program is allocated to improve OC water quality. This idea of transportation-related runoff, the idea of moving debris from litter and storm drains. So that's a big part of our environmental program. We're obviously looking at the zero-emission bus program. And over the last 14 years, this sort of idea of what is an environmental program has morphed and adjusted as the transportation industry has taken a closer look at things like VMT, greenhouse gas emissions, and things of that nature. So this idea of how this zero-emission bus pilot program fits into the overall program for OCT, I think is really important. So now why don't we jump into the zero-emission bus pilot. So on the next slide. So we have a few things that are underway. So we've already been gradually transitioning our entire OCTA bus fleet, which is more than 500 buses, by the way, for the past 20 years. So in 2000, we began transitioning away from diesel fuel buses with our first large purchase of LNG buses. 8 years later, in 2008, we purchased, my lights went off here, sorry about that. I need to move around a little bit more. 8 years later, we purchased about 300 CNG buses. And since that time, many of those buses have been equipped with even cleaner burning, near zero emission bus engines over the years, and many of those are still in use. And by 2016, a really important date in our history at OCTA, not only did we retire all of our diesel buses from active service, we also introduced our first hydrogen fuel cell electric bus in initial pilot. So we had 1 bus in 2016. And then last year, in 2020, both the pilot programs for our hydrogen buses and our plug-in electric buses began. So a little bit about that. So despite all of the challenges over 2020, with COVID-19, both in terms of ridership and economic uncertainty, we continue to be committed to the state's requirements as well as the good public policy to transition to zero emission buses. So let me talk a little bit about our plan. Last year, we did complete our zero emission rollout plan that will guide our investments to ensure that we achieve the 100% zero emission mandate by 2040. And I do want to thank CARB for being flexible on the deadlines because of the pandemic, but I'm also very proud that we did not adjust the delivery of our plan. We were able to adopt our plan, ask our board to adopt the plan, and submit it to CARB and meet the original deadline. It's also important to note that our plan is not a commitment to a specific type of technology at this point. We think we're still early in the technology space, and we want to make sure that we have a good understanding as we go forward what the options are, which that really leads me to the pilot. So we're in the process of testing both hydrogen fuel cell electric buses as well as plug-in electric buses to determine which technology meets OCTA's need related to operations, maintenance, and cost, among other things. We're going to test both types of these over the next few years. Our goal is really to collect not just data, but information that can be gleaned from the data. So it's a valuable resource in terms of understanding which technology, or frankly, the mix of technologies that we may pursue as we move forward. We're going to begin purchasing in a phased manner zero emission buses as part of future bus procurement starting in 2023. And at the same time, continuing to analyze any other emerging technologies that may come out and work with partners about how to secure funding for the purchase, operations, and maintenance of the buses. So let me talk a little bit about the hydrogen fuel cell electric program. So the operation of the program began about a year ago. Obviously, the construction of the fueling station, the procurement of buses started a little bit earlier than that. But as part of the project, a hydrogen fueling station was constructed at one of our bases, which is our Santa Ana bus base, which is on the edge of Santa Ana and Fountain Valley. And it is set up to fuel 10 of our buses that are in service. As of now, it's the largest hydrogen fueling station in transit for the nation. I would expect that we would lose that title at some point in time, but we like to use it for at least for now. It currently has a capacity of fueling 40 to 50 buses, and it was designed and built in a manner that is scalable up to 100 buses. The current buses in service have a range of up to 300 miles, and they're currently, I would say, primarily operating in underserved and disadvantaged communities within Orange County. It's been about a year since the buses have begun operating, and we've been reporting to our board on a regular basis about their performance. And I would say at this point, they've been performing very similar to how other new vehicles perform. Got a few glitches here and there. There's a learning curve from both a maintenance and operations standpoint, but we're very, very encouraged about the performance and how they will continue to improve as we fine tune everything. And I think that's important to note, because even if you're buying a CNG bus, or back in the old days of diesel buses, I think everyone that's been dealing with transit buses on this call knows that they don't always work perfectly the day they show up. There's always some type of sort of learning curve and break-in period, if you will. And we're seeing the similar types of things now with the hydrogen fuel cell electric. Nothing of major concern, it's just sort of par for the course. At the same time, moving on to battery electric, we are working currently on purchasing 10 plug-in battery electric buses. We anticipate that those buses will have an estimated range of about 200 miles. Which would allow them in our operating environment at OCTA currently to run for a full day and be charged nightly at one of our OCTA bus bases. And we do expect those buses to begin operating later this year. So that's the pilot portion of today's presentation from my perspective, but I'm going to turn to the partnership portion here. If we could go to the next slide. I think, and I'm a big believer that partnerships are critical in everything we do. Whether it's a local road project, we have to partner with our city partner. If it's a highway project, we need to partner with Caltrans. If it's a commuter rail project, we're partnering with Metrolink. If it's a bi-county project, we're partnering with LA Metro or Riverside County or San Diego County. I think you get the picture here. But it's even more important when you're talking about new things that are unknown to a certain degree, and we need to understand and learn from each other. So as you're all aware, zero emission technology and infrastructure in today's space can be relatively expensive in compared to sort of what we're used to. And we want to ensure that we're maximizing our investment as we go forward. So when possible, our goal was to use external grants to sort of offset the increased cost of the vehicle, the infrastructure cost, and that's what makes this partnership so important. There goes my light again. So this slide shows the partners. As you can see across the top, I've got them sort of laid out in two ways. One is sort of funding partners. So the California Climate Investments, California Air Resources Board, SB1 dollars, Caltrans, AQMD, CTE, get the sense. And then the project partners, New Flyer, Trillium, Air Products, Ballard, and Fiedler. We couldn't have done the project without all of those together. Everybody had a really critical role to play in the project, whether it was thinking about how it was going to move forward, whether it was funding it, or helping us implement it, frankly. The table here, the funding breakdown, this is sort of the sources, and I'll talk about the uses in a moment, but the sources, call it $23 million. So California Climate Investments and ARB, $12.5 million, AQMD, $1 million, and OCTA putting in $9.4 million. So then the question is, well, what did you use the money for? So sort of the breakdown is $7.3 million went to vehicles, about 10 buses, about $4.8 million for the cost of the fueling station, $700,000 or so for utility upgrades at our facility, and then about $400,000 to add hydrogen detection systems at our Santa Ana maintenance facilities. We put in, like I said, about $9.4 million. $5.6 million of that was for buses. We achieved that some savings internally as we reduced our last planned bus order of CNG buses by 10 buses. We took some additional money from the state SB1 State of Good Repair program administered by Caltrans. We sort of combined that, and then we had what we're calling in-kind contributions, about $3.8 million, staff resources, fueling station operations and maintenance, and we put that together to sort of come up with this plan here. And I would say just a quick note on that is whenever you're sort of going in front of your policy board with new and innovative things, I think having a way to sort of offset cost, have partnerships, and acknowledge that pilots, you're going to learn things that are good, and you might learn things that are less good, but being open and transparent with your policy board, I think, is critical in terms of what you expect out of your pilot. Several vendor partners, I mentioned them a moment ago. Trillium, they were the prime contractor for building, operating, and maintaining the fueling station. Air Products provided the fueling technology and supplying the hydrogen. New Flyer, manufacturing the fuel cell electric buses. Ballard Power Systems, the fuel cell systems. And Fiedler Group, who engineered the upgrades to our maintenance facilities to service the hydrogen fuel buses. So a very important partnership overall. And as with any partnership, there's bumps in the road. And I think if I'm providing some advice or hindsight, if you will, we should expect those. You should all expect those in any project and any partnership. Having a realistic schedule, having a realistic budget really sets the stage for a successful project, knowing that things aren't always going to go perfectly. So that's a big part of the way our partnership is today. I know you're going to hear a little bit more from other folks today, but maybe just let me go to the next slide and just wrap up with what we see next at OCTA. So we see a big part of our future is zero emission. So we're committed to meeting the 2040 zero emission bus goal, as I've stated. We're well on our way to that. We're excited about it. On a smaller scale, we're rolling out zero emission operator relief vehicles. So those of you in transit operations know what that means. It's shuttling drivers from bus to bus. We recently acquired an entire fleet of Chevy Bolts, B-O-L-T. They arrived on our facility, and we're currently underway with installing the charging infrastructure. And then we also participate in the van pool program where we incentivize van pools. And late last year, we introduced the full all-electric van pool vehicle as a partnership. We're very excited about that, and we expect to add more electric vehicles in the future. So thank you for attending today. I'll be here the whole time looking for good opportunities for Q&A. I hope I've provided some information, and we'll go from there. There's a quick question. It's the all-electric vehicle is a Tesla Model X. It's not a van, it's a Tesla Model X. So with that, Joseph, it's my honor to introduce Yachun Chow from the California Air Resources Board. Thank you.
Thanks, Daryl. Daryl has just demonstrated how OCTA as a transit agency, how it integrates environmental, equity, transportation, and the societal goals into its operation. With that very impressive opening, it's a little hard for me to measure up. So all I'm going to do is just to follow Daryl's trail to talk about how the state's clean transportation goals are carried out through the joint effort between transit agencies, regions, and also the state programs. So let's go to slide number 2. The pie chart in the second slide shows a greenhouse gas emissions breakdown by sector in California. The entire transportation sector accounts for 40% of the entire pie. This is a very impressive portion. And the emissions associated with light-duty vehicles are the largest emission source in the state. So controlling the light-duty vehicle associated emissions has become one of the most critical tasks for us to achieve our environmental goals. The effort ranges from controlling the upstream fuel production emissions to downstream tailpipe emissions. This is not an easy task. The reason why it's so challenging is because we have a very, very large vehicle and the end user population. So that's why the task is very challenging. Luckily, public transit is part of our big picture and the solution. Let's turn to slide number 3, please. While we all have the general knowledge about the transportation-related benefits that public transit can deliver, such as reducing passenger vehicle miles traveled, reducing traffic congestion, and providing multiple multimodal connections for more efficient navigation throughout the region. We also want to emphasize on other important functions provided by public transit. Public transit like OCTA, they also play a very pivotal role in improving equity access across the board, and also bringing that equity access to every community. This equitable access provided by public transit really enables community members to navigate through the cities and also the regions without barrier. When people have ways to navigate through the cities and the regions, they're able to visit places, to purchase goods, to buy groceries. They're able to participate in recreational events that might be far away from where they live. They could also have more job opportunities. They could travel to their dental or doctor's appointment as needed. They could go to school or colleges. The opportunities for their engagement with the entire society and the environment are unlimited as a result of the transit service. Such opportunities also operate and generate a lot of economic returns for both individuals and the society. OCTA has published numerous studies with results ranging from 4 to 1 to 2 to 1 economic returns if we have planned investments. The more we invest in public transit, the more economic return can be harvested. The more public transit services are provided, either through expanded service or increased service frequency, the more economic return is generated. This is truly one of the best examples of how public and private partnership can really produce increasing beneficial return. So from what Daryl just mentioned, OCTA partners with so many stakeholders to provide a service. There is also another kind of a public-private partnership here in between the public transit agencies and also the community. And if we can really kind of maximize all public-private partnership, we're going to be able to tackle a lot of issues together. So this is why, part of the reason that why the state wants public transit to be the first heavy-duty vehicle application to deploy zero-emission technologies. Let's go to slide number 4, please. With zero-emission buses, we can ensure that affordable zero-emission technologies are immediately available to everyone, including our low-income residents. We can also provide direct health benefits to both riders and the local communities. While public transit utilizes the most fuel-efficient technologies to transport mass population, the efficient benefits is also amplified accordingly. Despite all the benefits provided by zero-emission buses, deploying zero-emission buses is really not as easy as switching from flip phones to a smartphone. Slide number 5, please. It will really require a lot of synchronization. The synchronization between vehicle procurement, fueling infrastructure build-out, and also long-term fuel cost management. As Daryl mentioned, that the operation, the practice is going to require some changes there. It will also take years of practice for us to master the entire operation. It is also very important that transit agency have some pilot experience before a large-scale deployment, because you really don't want to buy things that you cannot use or you don't want to use. Or it doesn't work for you. So with that in mind, the state also understands that we need to have a holistic approach and also complementary measures together to ensure success. The state has been supporting pilot experience through our incentive funding programs. Last week, during this, as the opening for this Innovations of a Clean Transit webinar series, you heard about Sunline Transit Agency's hydrogen stations, which is the largest one in the United States with on-site electrolyzer. And today, OCTA Daryl presents to you the largest hydrogen station in the United States. Both that can truly do back-to-back filling for 40 to 50 fuel cell electric buses. Both projects are funded by the cap and trade auction proceeds and demonstrated the possibility and the success of zero-emission technology deployment in transit operation. And both stations are the #1 stations in the United States. Next week, this webinar series will present to you the Foothill Transit operation. Foothill has the longest data collection history on battery electric bus performance in the United States, or if not in the world. And the Air Resources Board, we've been their partner to pay for the data collection work since 2014. Okay, with that, I just realized that we have so many #1 transit agencies in this region. And I don't know, Joe, if you just, rounded up all these transit agencies to be a major show off. But this is really a great area full of opportunities, energy, and momentum. In addition, to ensure that we have a wide adopted practice in the transit agencies in the transit industry for zero-emission technologies, the Air Resources Board also adopted the Innovative Clean Transit Regulation in 2018 to provide a long-term market signal and also pave the way for other zero-emission heavy-duty vehicles. Slide number 6 highlights. While we advocate very hard for zero-emission buses because of their benefit, we also understand that not all transit services can be provided easily by buses or rail service. So we really want to provide transit agencies the flexibility of using different zero-emission transportation modes to achieve the same benefit. Such flexibility is provided in the ICT regulation called the Zero Emission Mobility Program. This program will encourage active transportation and enhances first and last mile connectivity. To incentivize the use of bicycles along with safe bicycle lanes, the regulation also gives bicycle mileage a multiplier of 3 for further encouragement. So it's a multiplier of 3. While we transition to slide number 7, I want to emphasize the importance of transit agencies and the region's collaboration in making efforts and moving forward to meet the state's emission reduction goals. For example, as Dara just mentioned, that OCTA's commitment to zero emission buses did not just start from the state-supported pilot project. OCTA inherited a single fuel cell electric bus from another transit agency. Was that back in 2016? Before they even had a hydrogen fueling station. In order to try out the technology, they worked with UC Irvine and also 2 other public hydrogen stations and they went through the whole 9 yards every day to get that single fuel cell electric bus refilled in order to test the limits of the technology. This kind of a dedication and commitment from an individual transit agency like OCTA is really the force that networks and supports regional collaboration. When regional collaboration is in place, we can really see the positive impact being amplified. Some examples for regional collaboration is, for example, to increase connected trips or to utilize or expand an integrated fare system so that riders can navigate through the region more easily and also more efficiently. Speaking of an integrated fare system, our sister agency, Caltrans, is currently teaming up with the Air Resources Board to identify ways of connecting transit agencies, their transit service, and also non-transit first and last mile connectivity service. So this kind of connection hopefully will help improve service efficiency and also reduce passenger vehicle usage. The market sounding document that will solicit concept and ideas will be posted in February. We're really hoping to receive NPO and the transit agency's professional input about how to make this project useful. With that, let's move on to slide number 8, please. Truly, in a modern society, public transit can and should be the top choice to transport all people. However, this is really not going to be easily received due to decades of overuse of personal vehicles. It will be really important to bring in new generations of riders through education and a more efficient transit design. But such effect is not going to be happen overnight. We need to be patient. We need to continue to invest in the long term to create a transit-oriented modern society so that we can really address the transportation-induced societal and the environmental issues. Government funding, as we all understand, will be essential to offset the higher cost, especially in early years. Public transit really has reshaped the landscape of transportation. It will continue to lead us towards a clean, sustainable transportation future with its commitment and through regional collaboration. So for slide number 9, which is also my last slide, it provides some information about the ICT regulation and also the funding finder tool that you can utilize it to locate available funding opportunities in your area. With that, I want to hand this over to Kimokafor. Kim is the Zero Emission Solutions Manager for Trillium, the lady who delivers energy to those beautiful fuel cell electric buses. Kim.
Thanks, Yao-Chun. Thanks for the introduction. Like she said, my name is Kimokafor and I work for Trillium. I manage the strategic initiatives business development group within Trillium. So that includes kind of all of the emerging technologies or fuels like hydrogen, electric vehicle fueling, autonomous trucking, things like that. But then I also look after or manage the opportunities for the design, build, and operation and maintenance group within Trillium. My next slide, please. And Trillium is owned by the Love's Travel Stop brand. So the Love's family of companies includes a number of different companies. Love's has been in operation for around 55 years at this point. We have over 25,000 employees across the country. We have, we've reached, I think we're at 548 truck stops across the United States. And we also have a trucking and logistics company within the organization. It's called Gemini, that transports all of our fuels to all of our stations. So Love's purchased Trillium about 5 years ago, and we are the alternative fueling member of the family. Next slide, please. So Trillium by the numbers. So Trillium has been in business for a little over 25 years. I think we're sitting at about 26 or 27 years at this point. We have over 200 stations across the country. Most of those are backlot stations for our fleet customers, but we do have about 60 to 65 public access fueling stations across the country for trucks and light duty vehicles and things like that. We have over 150 employees, and over 100 of those employees are mechanics that are scattered across the country to operate and maintain the fueling stations, both for ourselves and for our third-party customers. Next slide, please. So for the first several years, I would say for the first 20 years, Trillium was focused on compressed natural gas. But then as we saw mandates coming through and different legislative actions like the ICT rule, the ACT rule that Yao Chen was speaking about, that's when we started opening up our capabilities, right? So we moved from CNG, or we included RNG, renewable diesel, and then biodiesel. But then most recently, within the last few years, we've included electric vehicle charging as well as hydrogen fueling. We really think that our capabilities, the capabilities that we've gathered in our CNG experience, help to transition our customers from CNG or any other fuel out to these zero emission fuels. And we do that by balancing cost, understanding reliability, and sustainability goals, both from an environmental standpoint, but as well as a business standpoint, and then understanding how to scale and how to move forward with the fleet's goals. Next slide. The last slide on Trillium has to do with what we do. So our capabilities include design and build, operation and maintenance, and we like to adapt and grow with our customers. So when a customer like OCTA is looking at a zero emission fuel, we like to have those early conversations with them to help them understand what they're looking for and what would be the best method of transitioning to that zero emission fuel. And we've done that with quite a few of our customers, not only transit agencies, but also trucking fleets and van fleets and things like that. We're very proud of our operation and maintenance services. We provide 24/7 services across the country. That's based in Houston, Texas. Even during Hurricane Harvey, we were able to stay up and running. We moved our operation and maintenance services to a remote location in order to do that. But we're proud of our uptime. We have 99.9% uptime for our customers, and making sure that customers like OCTA can make rollout every single day for their customers. Next slide, please. And since we're talking about public-private partnerships, I did want to talk about the relationship that we've had with OCTA. So we started, and Daryl mentioned this in his presentation, we started working with OCTA back in the 2007, 2008 timeframe with their CNG buses. We've over that time frame, we've built 3 of their CNG stations, and we're also operating and maintaining those stations for them as we speak. So when we started to think about moving into the hydrogen space, we started doing our research and kind of building relationships with equipment manufacturers and fueling providers such as Air Products and the likes. When the OCTA RFP came out, it was a natural fit for us to partner up with a customer that we have a lot of experience with. And the reason for that, it's really all the things that Daryl mentioned. When you're moving, you know, as we're all moving into a new industry and a new fuel, partnering up with someone that you're comfortable with, that understands your capabilities and knows that we will find a way to make it work no matter what, is kind of a comfortable space to be in. So doing our first hydrogen station with OCTA was a really huge accomplishment for us. Next slide. So talking about the OCTA station, Daryl hit a lot of the high points. Of course, it's a station that's scalable. Right now it can fuel about 40, has the capability of fueling about 40 to 50 buses, but the scalability to be scaled up to about 100 buses. And I think one point of importance here is that on-site storage capability. So they have the ability to store fuel for up to 3 days. So the fueling contract there through Trillium is with Air Products. So it's an Air Product molecule there. And I think another important thing to mention here is the footprint. And I'll say why that's important a little bit later, but the footprint of this station is about 3,500 square feet, a little bit bigger than a CNG station. So as you're thinking about transitioning to hydrogen, you would have to remember that you have to have enough real estate in order to do that. So Daryl mentioned their initiatives with hydrogen and electric vehicle fueling, but they're still fueling their hydrogen stations. We're still maintaining their hydrogen station out at that Santa Ana location. So keeping in mind that you're not shutting down your CNG station when you transition over to your hydrogen station. You have to know how to run them both at the same time. Next slide. Daryl mentioned a couple of these, and I just wanted to provide some highlights on some of the lessons learned that we learned together. I think the biggest thing that I want to say is what's highlighted at the bottom of the slide, which is we learned together. It did take a lot of patience. It did take a lot of learning. It did take a lot of kind of stubbing our toe and figuring out, okay, that doesn't work. Let's try this instead. What we started off with isn't what we ended with. But generally, we met all the expectations of OCTA, and it turned out to be a really impressive station. You know, Yao Chen and Daryl said this earlier, it is the largest transit station in the country to date. Daryl, I also use that anecdote when I speak to others. So one day it won't be true, but for now it is. So we are using that. Some of the lessons that we've learned more specifically had to do with understanding how to operate hydrogen fueling and CNG fueling on the same lot. So thinking through things like what your alarm schedule is, what your shutdown schedule, the ESDs, the hazardous area coming from the two different fuels. At the OCTA station, their hydrogen dispenser is pretty close to their CNG dispenser. It's all under the same, in their same fueling building. And like they said, Fiedler Group came in and did the garage modifications to make sure that could work. So keeping that in mind was something that we had in mind in the beginning, but we also learned a lot as we went through it. The second one is very specific. It has to do with the location of the chiller. What happened specifically is that we determined the size of the chiller that went ahead of the dispenser. And what we determined is that we needed a larger chiller. And in order to accommodate the chiller that we had to change the location of the chiller. So I say that to say the equipment specifications, although you do specify a certain piece of equipment in the beginning or some specifications for the station in general in the beginning, that can change. So having the flexibility to understand, do we need to change something here? Is this the best outcome? Is this the best solution? Having the flexibility to be able to move to another solution if that's necessary. Another thing we've learned is it has to do with taxes. So, when you're selling infrastructure, there's a certain tax structure that goes with infrastructure, but when you're buying fuel, when you're buying a commodity, there's a different tax structure that goes with a commodity. So as you're planning your business plan and transitioning to zero emission, keeping in mind that taxes do change as you change the different things that you're working with. Of course, there's contracting. You have to think about, okay, with OCTA and Trillium, we were the prime contractor. But you know, is there a different way that we could have done contracting for the fuel contract? So thinking through, there's a long-term contract, there's an operation and maintenance contract, there's a fuel contract, there's an infrastructure contract, there's a bus contract. So having all of that aligned and understanding how that contracting scheme will be in place is something that we would have to think that you know, you would be advantageous for you to think through in the very beginning. And the last one, we dealt with it a little bit with OCTA, but it really had to do with access. Now we have, or they have a hydrogen tanker coming onto their site in order to put that hydrogen into their fuel tank that's on site there. Understanding, okay, what times can that hydrogen tanker come on site? We don't want it, they don't want it coming on in the middle of the day, but they also don't want it coming on during their fueling window. So providing some parameters on when that tanker can be on your site. So just some things to think through as you're thinking through your station. Next slide. And I wanted to provide a little bit of a comparison. So when you're thinking about a hydrogen station, you really have two options, right? You have the option to produce hydrogen on site through electrolysis or steam reformation or SMR, and there's a couple of other options, but the two main ones are electrolysis and SMR. But then you also have a delivered in option, right? So you can deliver in gaseous hydrogen, high pressure hydrogen, or liquid hydrogen. So obviously in OCTA's case, they're delivering in the liquid hydrogen, but we're also working with a transit agency up in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, which is Champaign-Urbana and Mass Transit District. And they've decided to go with on-site production via electrolysis. Next slide. So I kind of wanted to show you what OCTA's, or sorry, Champaign-Urbana station looks like. And this is a very early rendering. We're about to start construction next month. So that should be up and running by the second or third quarter this year. But they are using an electrolyzer. It's a NEL electrolyzer that produces 450 kilograms a day. And some things to note, it's a 1 megawatt electrolyzer. So if you're looking at producing hydrogen on site via electrolysis, you do have to think about what my demand charges are. You would have to talk to your local utility to see if there is some way that you can offset that demand charge in a different way. Another thing that I'll point out is the square footage for the station is 6,000 square feet. So it is almost double the size of the OCTA station, but out in Illinois for MTD, they had quite a bit of real estate, so they had the ability to do that. Another thing that MTD is looking at doing is that they're planning on installing a solar array to help them offset some of the electricity usage that's there. Right now, we're working through what the electricity bill would look like for them on a monthly basis. Similar to OCTA, we're working with CTE on this project as well. So they're working as the consultant there. Kind of as a price comparison, like Daryl said, the OCTA, the infrastructure piece of the station costs about $4.8 million. In comparison, the Champaign-Urbana station cost them about $8 million. Some things that you would have to think about, the difference is they're producing the hydrogen on site. So they don't have a fuel contract. They're not really dependent on a fuel provider. So it's really weighing out the risks of what you're willing to accept to understand whether or not you can, this would be a station that's worth it for you. Oh, next slide. I was trying to transition the slides myself. One additional thing that I wanted to put right at the end of my presentation is, so the numbers that I threw out are large, right? $4.8 million, $8 million, both of them are backed by grants. As Daryl and Yelchin said, it's backed by CARB. I believe the Champaign-Urbana station is backed by an FTA grant, so a federal grant. So as you're thinking about the capital expenditures of your station, that you do have some options, right? So you have grants, but there are only so many grants, right? And you can only apply for so many grants until you get to the point where you're just, you get tired of applying for grants, right? Another thing that you can do is talk to your local utility. So in California, folks like SoCalGas, PG&E, SCE, understanding are they able to provide some assistance, if not from anything else for the OpEx of the station, understanding if there's a rate that makes more sense for you to be on to help the economics for the station. Another thing I would be remiss if I didn't mention public-private partnerships, so P3s. So the opportunity or the ability for someone like Trillium to finance a station. So we are working with New Flyer and, you know, in Miami-Dade in a P3, and we're also working on a P3 with the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, where we are building 27 CNG stations across the state of Pennsylvania, and that's a P3 type of structure. So you do have companies that are willing to upfront the capital expenditure for your station in order to assist with transitioning to zero emission. But some things you have to think about there, right? So that is a commitment. You have to have a fueling commitment, you have to have a volume commitment. You do have to, you know, the risk is being transitioned over to a private entity. So there is some requirements that come along with that. So there is a contract that comes along with that. But either way, it's another option, right? And there are quite a few companies that are open to that type of structure. Next slide, please. So this is my contact information. If you have any questions related to infrastructure, public-private partnerships, anything like that, I'm more than happy to connect with you. I'm also on LinkedIn. So yeah, that's what I've got. I want to transition it over to my friend Mark Fisher over at New Flyer. New Flyer and Trillium has worked together on quite a few projects, both OCTA and Champaign-Urbana. So we have a long-standing relationship with them as well. Take it away, Mark.
Thank you so much, Kim, and good morning, good afternoon to everybody. My name is Mark Fisher. I'm the Director of National Sales for New Flyer, as well as MCI on the public sector side of that business. And really pleased to join you all this morning. And what I'm going to be talking about is fuel cell electric buses. So we'll go to the next slide. And give you a little bit of background on New Flyer and our electric bus experience. This isn't meant to be a sales pitch. Want to keep it more just technology focused. Do a little bit of some comparisons on older fuel cell technology, what we did in the past compared to what we're doing currently, as well as some of the trade-offs between battery electric and fuel cell electric. So a little bit about New Flyer. We've been manufacturing zero emission buses for over 50 years. So that does go back to late 60s with our early trolley electric buses. So the overhead wire catenary type designs. Some of the earliest customers for us in that space was San Francisco and Toronto, and then down the years with Vancouver and Seattle. So the second bullet point always is outdated because we're constantly putting more buses out every day. So this one shows 41. We're actually a couple thousand heavier than that. Overall heavy duty transit buses that are running in service, 7,300 of those powered by electric motors and battery propulsion, and then 1,600 of those are zero emissions. So the zero emission number does include trolley electric. We offer all four types of electric, and within that four types, we do put diesel electric hybrid within electric. It does still have an electric traction motor. It still has your energy storage, batteries, inverters, high voltage, and actually in many ways it's a more complicated system because you also have to deal with the internal combustion engine. But then the three types of pure zero emission propulsion systems. So your battery electric, your trolley electric, and then again, what we're focused on today being fuel cell electric. So as we go to the next slide, we've been manufacturing fuel cell electric buses. Actually, our first one was back in 1994, and prototypes, just a couple one-offs. But really our first large-scale production run was for Whistler, BC Transit for the Winter Olympics back in '09. And it was a 5-year program to evaluate fuel cell technology, and along with fueling and just overall operations. And a shout out to CARB, who was also collaborated on that project back then. So they've been engaged in zero emission bus technology development and deployment for a number of years for those of us that have been in the industry going back in the earlier 2000s. I mean, it's been certainly a big initiative and something they promoted for some time. So really appreciate their diligent work on that. And then as we transition to the next slide, kind of some of the things that we learned through that BC Transit deployment. Really, it was those buses, we were more of an integrator, taking in some subsystems, particularly the fuel cell and the integration into the propulsion, where it was, we just basically assembled them and installed them into our vehicle, into the glider. And unfortunately, that company did go bankrupt, the integrator portion of it, and really just was one of the biggest kind of hurdles that we had to get over to ensure that the buses were meeting the uptime that were needed. So a lot of things that we really look back, our engineering group looked back as we got into our kind of next gen where we're at these days, on taking that ownership of overall system controls. Also looking at the serviceable components, things just day-to-day maintenance, making sure that technicians have readily accessible components that as they do their PMs, or if they need to replace a component, that it's not costing them tons of man hours to basically remove and replace. And then again, as I mentioned, just the overall system kind of integration and with the fuel cell, and really understanding the power needed and when it's needed and where it's needed, but really taking control of that as the manufacturer, and not just kind of bolting things in and plugging in a black box basically. And I mentioned a couple slides ago on the hybrid electric. The hybrid electric really had an instrumental path into where we're at these days with the evolution of zero emission technology. When we started doing hybrids back in the late 90s, and then through the kind of mid to late 2000s on electrifying components, the HVAC, the air compressor, some of those components running on high voltage, where we had that on hybrids. It's just been kind of a gradual evolution to get where we're at today, and really having robust, reliable systems, subcomponents that aren't going to down a bus and keep it out on the road for service. And then, of course, just energy consumption. That's always, regardless of what the propulsion is, we're always looking to improve, because obviously that drops to the bottom line for transit agencies on operating costs. So that could be overall just battery management, energy management, what loads are going where, when, as well as looking at subcomponents and the weight of the vehicles. We've seen on the battery technology development over the years, where the weight per kilowatt hour is coming down, but also the size and the energy density going up. So we're able to put more batteries on. So that's really benefited on the battery electric propulsion, but still that weight has kind of been balanced out. So just continuous development, continuous improvement to ensure we're constantly improving that energy consumption. And as we move to the next slide, a little bit more back, from those 2009 fuel cells to where we're at now. Back then, it was a certainly different kind of architecture. It was a fuel cell dominant hybrid, basically. Hybrid meaning the fuel cell and the battery pack. We used a Ballard 150 kilowatt fuel cell with a smaller string of batteries, and they were just under 50 kilowatt hours of batteries on those buses back then. Where now it's more of a battery dominant hybrid. So it's really a battery electric bus with a fuel cell as a range extender. Is kind of a good way to kind of visualize it. So what we're used to, Ballard 85 kilowatt fuel cell is our standard right now. And we're, depending on configuration, size of the vehicle, 40 foot versus 60 foot, we'll go 100 to 150 kilowatt hours of batteries. And of course, still able to take advantage of braking for regen, and then a little bit extra power for those that need the acceleration up hills, and and just depending on duty cycle. So, and as well with that extra battery capacity, that if the bus is to run out of fuel or get lower on fuel, you still have that extended range after the fact, just with the battery energy storage. Move to the next slide. So this is kind of our production readiness and where we're at these days on our 40-foot and 60-foot. So using the Ballard, the 85 kilowatt fuel cell, whether a 40-foot, what we call our Excelsior Charge H2, 40-foot or 60-foot, those are ready. We've been building them. Almost all of our deployments so far have been California. We do have a couple coming up with Champaign-Urbana on the 60-foots, as Kim mentioned, as they're getting ready to build out their fueling station, and then also working with Hydrogenics as well on their fuel cell. So we're kind of final rounds of evaluation and fine tuning. So hopefully that'll be an offer here pretty soon for regular production. And then on the next slide. And these are some of the deployments we've had on the fuel cells to date. So this is our Charge H2 vehicle. So the 10 for Orange County, as Daryl mentioned, on that project. We got 10 up in Oakland at AC Transit, 40 foots, as well as 1 60-foot, and then 6 to our friends over at Sunline. So we talk about just partnerships in general, and certainly there's always going to be the bumps in the road. But it's really having that engagement, not just between a manufacturer and the end user, the agency or authority, or just the fueling side of it, but just everything with CARB, with FTA, a lot of work with CEC. So really having just that full kind of portfolio of stakeholders at the table really makes for a successful project. And any challenges that do come up, it's something that we can all overcome, and then we learn lessons and we move forward, and the next deployment will be that much you say simpler, but a little bit easier. So we'll go to the next slide. And this kind of, for everything, there's trade-offs, and especially when it comes to zero emission buses, there's never a one size fits all. So much is dependent upon duty cycle and just overall kind of operating environment. So kind of want to lay out a couple things, and again, no one size fits all, but between a battery electric and a fuel cell electric, and this is based on technology. It's not based on our platform and what we do better or not, but just, we obviously know, zero emissions, both sides of the fence here, robust designs. Battery electric right now, still the range is more limited. We're getting over 200 miles, and I know as an industry and other offerings that battery pack sizes continue to increase, so that range is increasing. But on fuel cell right now, out of the box, Daryl mentioned 300 miles at Orange County. We've gotten up to 350 miles. I'll have a slide on that in a minute. So you do get that range, kind of alleviate the range anxiety with a fuel cell when compared to the battery electric. Fuel cells are a little bit less in curb weight, and that is a big deal in California, keeping under, and both can meet California axle regulations, but we got to be very mindful of increased weight, and of course, just in general, bus weights keep going up, not just because of propulsion, but other components that are continuously asked to be put on the vehicles. We've seen the weights go up quite a bit over the years and decades. And a couple of the bigger things when you compare the two, when you look at battery electric, you're plugging them in, whether it's overnight, maybe during afternoon, or doing on-route charging. But either way, the charging time does take a lot longer than what you might see on a fuel cell, or kind of that 6 to 20 minute fill time. So you're getting close to what it might be for a CNG bus, or for those folks running diesel as well. You're kind of coming down a fuel lane, normal operations for a bus agency. And then, as Kim mentioned, on the fill station, where much more scalable compared to on chargers, scalable but not to the degree of a filling station. And then the infrastructure costs with battery electric does tend to kind of outpace what it might be on hydrogen. And then the last bullet point on the hydrogen certainly doesn't apply to California. Auxiliary heaters, we put them in for cold climates being more extreme climates, getting down, sub-freezing and sub-zero type temperatures, where an auxiliary heater could help on a battery electric. However, on the fuel cell electric, we don't need to put one on. We have enough power on board to comfortably heat the passenger compartment without needing that auxiliary heater. So some of those trade-offs. Go to the next slide, please. And so this is general overall high-level layout of, and architecture of the major subcomponents. So on the left, you got our 40-foot bus. On the right, you have our 60-foot. And just on propulsion mostly here, you see the fuel or the hydrogen tanks located near the front on the 40-foot, and then kind of centered around the middle of the vehicle on the 60-foot. And different amounts, we use 5 tanks on the 40-foot, 37.5 kilograms of hydrogen capacity, and then on a 60-foot, 8 tanks that gets up to 60 kilograms. And then a lot of the other components are very similar to and identical to what we do for battery electric. You got your energy storage, you got your cooling for those batteries, your power electronics, your inverters, same traction motor, air compressor, high voltage air compressor. So a lot of those components that we've developed in the past, transferring over, HVAC, it's just been this evolution to where we're at right now on our overall system architecture for fuel cells. And we'll go to the next slide. And of course, range is always one of the hot topics. And these are some numbers from the Altoona test we did on the 40-foot. And you can see the one of the middle columns there, the OCBC, which is the Orange County duty cycle that they use at Altoona, where it was about 282. We have proven it out to 300 in more ideal conditions in Orange County, above 300, but really getting a little bit better than what we had hoped for during initial development stages. So, and not to say ideal flat ground 70-degree days, but more ideal operating environments, we can hit 350 miles. We've proven that out in a few different tests that we've done, and that includes a mix of basically running the vehicle on hydrogen down to depletion, and then getting about an extra 20 miles of range solely on the battery energy that's remaining. And then we'll go to the next slide, please. And so this slide kind of talks about just seeing the bus price trends. The orange line representing fuel cell, the lower kind of bluish grayish line being battery electric, and your y-axis doesn't have prices indicated in there, and bus prices do vary just depending on other bus stuff, where fare boxes and camera systems and CAT AVA, AVL, so it does vary sometimes quite significantly depending on the end user's specific technical specifications. But those first BC transit buses were about just a little bit over $1.8 million per bus. And now we're seeing fuel cells right around 1.1 to 1.2, again, depending on some of the other components that are put on the vehicle. So we've seen a very good steady reduction in pricing on fuel cells. And where you see on battery electric, going back to 2010, where we've certainly seen reductions, mostly coming from the cost per kilowatt hours of those batteries. But again, the energy density going up, cost coming down per kilowatt hour, being able to put more batteries on the vehicle. you know, it hasn't seen as dramatic of a drop because we're putting more batteries on, but you see it kind of leveling out. But you know, we do see battery technology and cost per kilowatt hour continue to come down, and you know, we'll all see as an industry where we're at in the years to come and decades to come. Newer technologies with whether it's lithium ion chemistry or others. We'll see what that next big breakthrough is, but that's certainly been you know, very helpful in kind of bridging the gap between any zero emission bus and your conventional propulsion type internal combustion engine. You know, certainly just doing all we can on the manufacturing side, you know, mass production optimization, having not just one order here, one order there, but really being ready to kind of have a good steady production flow of zero emissions. A lot of the standardization that's gone on between fuel cell and battery electric, and really just trying to reduce the complexity of the design, the assembly on the production line to help achieve lower costs and passing those costs on. And then, as we see on the fuel cell, working with hydrogenics, so having 2 fuel cell suppliers will be certainly of benefit to end users, seeing that increased competition. And then, of course, we'll make it up in volume. So we always talk about increasing volume will reduce costs. So that's certainly one that we hope as an industry just to see more zero emission bus technology being deployed, of course, here in our state of California as well. We'll go to the next slide. And a beautiful picture of Orange County 40-foot fuel cell. So really appreciate the partnership with Daryl and his entire staff. And that's what I have for my presentation. So with that, I think the last slide just has the questions, my contact information. Please feel free to reach out with any kind of questions. And I see a few questions building up in the chat room. So I will kick it back over to Joseph to kind of bring us home with some questions and answers and some giveaways. Thanks, everybody.
Great, thank you, Mark, and thank you to all of our speakers. And thank you to everybody, to all of our attendees for joining us. We're not done yet. As Mark said, we have a questions to answer session right now. I see some questions in there already, so I will go ahead and read out the participant questions and we'll answer those. And then I have some questions for our speakers as well. And you can also, as mentioned at the beginning, you can use the raise hand function and we'll unmute you to ask your question. So, excuse me, just a technical difficulty. I started sharing my screen, but I realized that I cannot see the chat right now. So I'm going to ask my colleague, Emily, to read out those questions for us, please.
Sure, Joe. Okay, I think our first question is for Kim. Specifically, cost of hydrogen fuel is delivered, who manufactured the dispensers, more details on maintenance, yearly costs, web costs per year, etc.
You are unmuted.
I think I heard part of your question, Emily. You know, the manufacturer of the dispenser, it's an air products dispenser. And what was the other? You were kind of faint in the beginning.
Can you hear me better now, Kim?
Yes.
Okay, great. So specifically the cost of hydrogen fuel as delivered and some more details on maintenance yearly costs.
I don't recall those two numbers off the top of my head. So I'll have to get back to you on that. I'm sorry.
Great, thanks, Kim. We have another question from Larry. I think this is just for the entire group. Please share lessons learned with respect to workforce training and development for the manufacturing segment and the maintenance service segment.
Are you talking maintenance of the bus, maintenance of the fueling station?
I'll take a little bit because it's one that does come up quite a bit on, for us on the manufacturing side, as well as our service techs, and obviously they're out there training transit agencies technicians as well. So certainly that's a big part of zero emission deployments, where especially for properties that have not worked with high voltage before. So you get into overall high voltage safety training, having the necessary PPE, and then of course getting into the troubleshooting and everything. But yeah, the first step is certainly the safety aspect of it. Ensure that when they are working on a vehicle, that they understand all the different lockout procedures, that they have the proper PPE, and there's quite a bit of information training programs. We do one. There's other programs, some local colleges here in Southern California. I know Rio Hondo has a very good program. So there's certainly a lot of access to some training programs. And what we've done in the plants was basically the same thing, how we train a lot of our folks, obviously a little bit more based on manufacturing and what that certain cell might be building up. A lot of the same principles as far as safety, high voltage, PPE, tooling. If you have mechanics that are typically got their snap-on, roll-away toolbox. Yeah, a lot of those tools you're not using. You're using insulated tools, and they can be fairly significantly priced, even compared to snap-on. It's not cheap tools. I'm talking about wrenches and screwdrivers and things like that.
Great, thanks, Mark. We have a question from Carrie Schindler. How is the transition to hydrogen and battery powered buses affecting the cost of operations? And that's a big one. I suppose maybe some things you could speak to are training your workforce, telematics that you might need to use to understand your different cycles. If you have any downtime for the buses, any kind of comments on how the cost of your operations are being affected by this transition?
Who's the question to, Joe?
I suppose that would probably be for Daryl. They didn't specify, but I'm guessing that would be one for Daryl. Or if Mark or Kim, if you have experience working with your partners, you can speak to that.
The things
go ahead, Mark.
The things I see on the maintenance side, because that's certainly a question that comes up as far as just the bus. Typically, what you're going to see is, whether you're operating a CNG, say CNG or diesel, it's basically any of that maintenance work you do on your engines, transmissions, oil changes, things like that. That obviously is gone. So really on the propulsion side, there's really not a lot of maintenance that goes on. Now, if there's any failures, any replacements, premature failures, obviously a different story, but your normal PM programs, basically it's removing engine transmission, and you still have the rest of your axle work and your HVAC stuff and the rest of the vehicle, but nothing really on the propulsion other than inspection, making sure lugs are tight, not working themselves loose, inspecting wiring, things like that nothing's chafing. But that's really what the big upside to reduced maintenance is. And then on the operation side, I mean, that can include fueling, and I won't go into that because it's so regional. So it does depend. Kim can probably talk about on the fueling side for hydrogen as well, but it certainly does fluctuate.
Yeah.
Joe, I put something in the chat, but I'll just talk about it quickly. We provided a 6-month report to our board back in September, and we looked at sort of 2 cost metrics. Just looking at maintenance costs, we looked at, for the hydrogen buses for 6 months, the cost per mile was 54 cents compared to CNG at 72 cents. So that's sort of an intriguing cost number there. Adding in fuel, that takes the hydrogen to $1.44 a mile and the CNG at 95 cents a mile. So I think that gives sort of a sense of where the cost differences are. Again, 6 months of a pilot, things can change over a period of time. but we'll continue to report on that, and that'll be part of the data that we collect going forward.
Great, thank you. We had a question about how many buses can be filled, and at the OCTA station, it's about 40 to 50. We also had a question about what's the lead time on production and delivery on the hydrogen fuel cell bus once the letter of intent is given. And Mark, you answered that. From letter of intent, it's approximately 9 to 10 months to start build and approximately 8 weeks for the build itself. And you can provide more specifics. And thank you for our speakers for answering these. So if I miss anything that hasn't been answered, please let me know. Let's see, what organization administers the Zero Emissions Mobility Program that Yachun presented? And Yachun answered the transit agency interested in the Zero Emission Mobility Program will manage it directly or can contract it out. However, the transit agency must have control over how the zero emission passenger miles are being documented and counted. The interested transit agency will reach out to CARB for this program. All right. And I saw also somebody had raised their hand. Call in user 1. You've been unmuted, so you can ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Ranjit George. I just want to thank SCAG for putting an excellent seminar and inviting some great speakers. I appreciate the speakers sharing their views with us, and I hope we can hear an update and ever so often. So my background is with South Coast AQMD. I was with there for 30 years, and we helped Sunline into the hydrogen program. We were great partners. We partnered with Ballard. Our involvement South Coast with Ballard was so much that the directors wanted a major equity share. So much we were involved in publicizing, advertising their capabilities. I have a quick question. Since then, we have come a long way, and we really appreciate Sunline's involvement in this program to bring the fuel cells to this level and new flyers and the partners. I have a specific question. Can you please throw more light on the cost of battery infrastructure for, let's say, 10 or 20 buses versus a hydrogen fuel cell infrastructure? What are the cost to comparison? And secondly, do you use LCF credits for these fuels so that, let's say, to become competitive with CNG, etc.? Those are the two questions. Thank you. Hello?
So this is Daryl from OCTA. I understand the question. I cannot remember off the top of my head the cost of our battery charging infrastructure. We can try to follow up with SCAG, and maybe they can put that in the chat when we're done there. And then we are using the alternative fuel cost credit to offset our CNG purchases, any number of things that we can do, obviously, with renewable natural gas, as well as the alternative fuel tax credit as well, to offset the purchase of fuel cost.
So are you eligible to use it for hydrogen, or since it's a publicly funded program, you may not be eligible to use for hydrogen fuel?
I'm not sure of the hydrogen applicability. I think as of now, it's only 10 buses in a 500 bus fleet. I think that's not been needed for us from that perspective. So, the other 500 or 490 buses are CNG, but again, we can also follow up with SCAG on that particular piece as well.
And I'd also add, when you talk about charging infrastructure, the golden answer is it depends, right? It really depends on, and there's big differences between 10 buses, 20 buses, 100 buses, and the power coming in, working with the utility up front to really understand, their capability, what they can provide, or if they need to upgrade transformers or build substations or whatever. I mean, those can certainly be huge cost drivers. So, and then just the facility itself, whether you're trenching and running conduit. So it's so unique to each property that it's really hard to say. I mean, the hardware itself for a charger, certainly, but then there's different size chargers, different manufacturers. So, I mean, it's really looking at the full scope, engaging with the facilities folks and what needs to be done at the facility, engaging with the utility. So it's really one of those things that it's there's a few pieces of that puzzle that need to be looked at.
Thank you, Mark. And by the way, Mark, there's a question in the comments. I hope you can answer that in the chat real quick. But I wanted to ask, I have a lot more questions for everybody, but we're running short on time and still have our trivia. But before we want to go, I want to ask Daryl, mostly directed to Daryl. This last question is how has the pandemic impacted your zero emission bus efforts?
Clearly, I think public transit post-pandemic and pre-pandemic are completely different. I mean, whether it's ridership or social distancing requirements. But with that said, I think that we believe strongly that there is a future for public transit. It may look a little bit different. The service levels may be different. Densities may be different. So we've sort of taken the ability, or the focus, that this is a short-term set of issues, but it doesn't change our long-range plan. So the long-range plan still is having a full fleet of zero-emission buses. I said earlier, we didn't delay in putting in our plan to CARB. We didn't ask for delay. We didn't do anything there. We did adjust a CNG bus purchase down a little bit because of ridership demands that we had underway. But I think the important thing I would say, Joe, is we have this sort of 1, 2, or 3 year sort of impact, but we're making decisions for 10 and 20 years out. So we shouldn't lose sight of the big picture on this.
That's a great point. Thank you, Daryl.